Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, this is Sal Munoz with All Chicago. We are expecting a few more people. We are not expecting too many folks, so I'm just going to wait to see who rolls in. So we'll be getting started in about 2 to 3 minutes. All right, everyone. So we have the folks that we're going to be having for today. Now, again, this is a follow-up to our last outreach workflow meeting, where we were taking in some feedback from the outreach work group as we developed a standard, what will hopefully become a standardized outreach workflow for the entire continuum. Now, one thing that a couple of housekeeping notes. If you check in the sidebar, you'll see a handout. This is the outreach workflow handout. Please download this. Again, it's a draft. It's subject to change. It's subject to evolve, and that's, we can probably expect that there will be a few changes, minor changes that'll be happening to it, but the general gist of the workflow is there. Now, the other thing that I wanted to mention is that I won't be taking questions for the first 30 minutes or so. I want to get through a couple of live demonstrations, I want to actually go through the workflow before I take in any questions. So I won't be looking at your questions. I won't be looking at the chat window, and I will not be taking anyone off of mute. This was a pretty significant, this is sort of what drove us to have to create another webinar to follow up with. So we are going to just dive into it today. Hopefully we can finish up under the hour. Oh, that is the wrong title there. But what we want to address today is we'll get started off with a little bit of context as to why we're doing this, why we're standardizing workflows, developing workflows for outreach, etc. Then we'll talk a little bit about the glossary, some standardized understandings of what concepts mean. Then we'll get into the naming convention, review some of the rules that we had established last week. We'll review the documentation, do a live demonstration, and then at the very end, I'll address any of your open questions that you have. Now, I will say that you can go ahead and send in your questions. That's totally fine with me, and I will review them at the end of today, at the end of our session. Now, mind you, several of these concepts are assuming that you are an HMIS user. If you are completely new to HMIS, then this is going to seem a little unfamiliar to you. They're going to be concepts for HMIS that the person who's not an HMIS user may not understand, and that will all be addressed next week during our training. So, a little bit of context. There has been a workflow for outreach teams and outreach projects, but still agencies sometimes had different understandings of common phrases like contact, encounters, engagement. And as such, that means at system level it becomes a little inconsistent. And it's something that we really can't dive into when we want to look at the data that outreach workflow teams are doing. And so, that's a system-wide explanation of why we're moving towards a standardized workflow and trying to standardize the understanding for general outreach teams. But more importantly, I think the real challenge comes for agencies that are funded by DFSS or that are receiving funding for their outreach projects is that one thing that we found in this process of moving the DFSS quarterly reports to HMIS is that outreach teams had a lot of issues and didn't have consistent data that they needed to report out on because they all had different understandings of what the report meant. They all had different understandings of when they're supposed to input a client into HMIS, etc. And that really became a significant issue when you're trying to establish your report, right? When you're trying to run your report for your project, there are several issues that arise. Maybe you didn't have every single client in there that you needed to, etc. So it really does become an issue for your agency when you have to report out on it through HMIS. And as we become more centered on data and as we become to rely on data more and more, this information is going to become critical because it really affects your clients. It affects who is active in coordinated entry, etc. So again, what we're really trying to do is standardize the data across the system so that agencies can more easily and reliably run their reports, and so that the clients that you're currently working with that are in the coordinated entry system are fully accounted for. What happens with unsheltered populations, what could happen is that if they don't interact with the system very much, and your agency has a different way of exiting a client or thinks they should exit a client at XYZ interval, then what that causes is that means that client will then eventually become inactive in coordinated entry because they haven't been touched by any project. So that's what we're trying to get at. We're trying to standardize these workflows so that we can have reliable data and so that we know which clients are out there and who can actively contact them. Now, I talked a lot about standardization and having a common understanding. And in order to do that, I think this is a good stepping off point to talk a little bit about the glossary that we have. So first things first, what I want to address is the fact that when I'm talking about outreach and when we are talking about outreach teams, we are not talking about skills assessors. Excuse me. Again, we're talking about project level data. So that means that if I'm working at, if All Chicago has an outreach project and we're funded to do outreach, I'm talking specifically about that outreach project. Now, we have several outreach workers that are skilled assessors, and all they do are skilled assessments, and all they do are assess clients on the street. You do great work, but we're not talking about you. What we're talking about are those agencies that are funded and have to report out on the clients that they interact with, or agencies that do outreach to different populations and want to track their clients in HMIS. Those are really the folks that we're trying to pare down to. So again, I want to make it clear, if you only ever do skilled assessments, what we're talking about is not in relation to you. We're talking about project level data, data that belongs to your agency. Skilled assessors, though you work at an agency, technically in sort of a weird way, when you're entering data into HMIS, it's almost like you're entering data for the agency of coordinated entry, of the coordinated entry system, not of your agency. So I want to make that a little clear. Now, again, this workflow can work concurrently with skilled assessors, but again, this is project level data. This is not for those folks that only do skilled assessments. So I also want to start off with the first contact encounter. So this is the first instance in which a client is encountered with minimal information, is encountered where minimal information may be provided to the outreach worker at this stage as they build to engagement. It's also in observation of the client, right? So encountering may just be talking with them and them deciding not to share their name, or not wanting to share anything with you, but you are able to say that there is a homeless person on the corner of 79th and Halstead that I have encountered and made contact with. They didn't give me their name, but I know that they're there now. And that in that instance, that would be a challenging encounter with the client where they didn't want to share information with you. Now, let's say you meet a client who's gung-ho about everything and wants to share their name with you, their age, etc. That would be a positive encounter, a positive contact. So what you're going to hear from this point on is sort of encounter, contact used interchangeably. It's just really an observation, being able to see the client that's counted as a contact/encounter. And then from there, we sort of divide it by a positive and challenging encounter, where a positive encounter is where you were able to engage with the client, collect identifying information, collect their consent. And a challenging encounter is where you have difficulty collecting that information or consent. Now, the next concept that I want to talk about is the naming convention. So when a client is first encountered, they may not feel comfortable sharing their full detail, in particular their name. And in order to address this, we have a naming convention so those clients can be better located and updated as outreach efforts continue. We're going to get into what the naming convention is a little later in this presentation, so just hang on tight with this, but this is what we're going to use for those clients that don't give you their name initially, but we still want to be able to track them and record them in the system. And now we move on from encounter/contact to the next level up, and that's engagement. And an engagement is an instance where there is a creation of a deliberate client assessment or a case plan. This also marks the start of data quality expectation. So this is where now we will officially count this client as being engaged with your outreach project. They're officially enrolled into your outreach project. Now, engagement is a bit more involved. It's not just, hey man, hey bud, what's your name, what's your age, etc. Rather, it's where a client creates a full assessment. They go through a full case plan with you. You're able to bring them into your office to develop a plan for them, or you're able to talk with them and get much more deliberate information than you were ever able to do so before. And then engagement, the terminology of that becomes a little different once the initial engagement happens. After that, after the initial engagement, then we talk about successful and unsuccessful engagements. So a successful engagement is where the client's located, and an unsuccessful engagement may be where the client is located, but they're unwilling to engage. They don't want to talk to the outreach worker. Maybe they're a bit more standoffish. Maybe, whatever number of things. And the reason that we want to list these into these sort of slots of successful versus unsuccessful is basically because we want to know if a client is having a string of unsuccessful engagements, then if they ever get matched to housing, or they are part of the coordinated entry system, or maybe they have some type of mental episode where they need an observational assessment completed on them. That's how we can better locate those clients, locate the clients that may need just that extra push, that extra attention to fully move through to housing and to the services that they potentially need. And then unsheltered status is just the unsheltered status of the client as documented in the HMIS housing history section of the outreach assessment. So again, unsheltered status, most of your clients as outreach workers are probably going to be unsheltered. And I understand that there may be some folks who have permanent housing, but they like going back to their old stomping ground every once in a while. But unsheltered status in this instance is really determined by the housing history section in the outreach assessment of HMIS. So let's talk a little about the naming convention. So again, clients sometimes aren't crazy about giving their full names out to you. And in the instance of encountering a client for the first time, we still want you to be able to get credit for encountering a client, talking with them, even if they didn't give you a name. And it's also really important because this will eventually lead us to be able to find them later on, right? It builds a history for this client in the system that may not have been there if you did not use this naming convention. So the first time you encounter someone, just keep in mind that you will probably be entering them into your project once you get back to the office or whenever you do your data entry. Now, let's see what the actual naming convention is, the one that we have recommended. So our recommended naming convention is that the first name be the date of contact, written out with no space, and time in 4 digits with an AM or PM designation. And then the last name will be their distinguishing characteristic. So in this example, we have someone who was encountered on May 6th at 2:04 p.m., and their distinguishing characteristic is that they had a red hat. So again, that's what you're going to be looking out for. The May 6th, 2:04 p.m. Really allows us to be able to know when you were doing your outreach where, and of course the distinguishing characteristic should be something that is very apparent of the client, something that may not be changing. So if they consistently have a red hat every time you see them, or maybe they have a particularly long beard or whatever it may be, that's something that you would want to use as a distinguishing characteristic. And again, That does not mean that this client's name will be that forever. You're hoping to build a relationship with this person so that eventually May 6th, 2:04 p.m. Red Hat turns into James Miller or something of the sort. Now, I want to review the documentation that I have attached for you. So everyone should find this handout already in the handout section of the GoToWebinar application. And as you can see, everything really starts off as it goes through three different major sections of outreach. So you start out with the initial encounter, and that's where we make the first contact, where it's a positive or challenging contact, depending on how much information we're able to collect, depending on depending on the consent form that we're able to collect. Then we move on to engagement, and engagement again means that you're able to deliberately do a client assessment and or a case plan. And it also starts the mark of data quality. This is when the client is quote unquote officially counted in your project. And then ongoing engagement. And ongoing engagement is really where each encounter with a client is documented as successful or unsuccessful through service transactions in order to sort of keep tabs on where that client's at and what their state is. And of course, we have the naming convention right here, some more terminology, and then you'll see the initial encounter, which starts out with the first client contact. And at the end of this process of the initial encounter, whether a client gave you their name, their date of birth, their SSN, what their favorite color is, what their first pet's name is. They could give you all the information in the world, or they don't tell you a lick. They don't tell you anything about themselves. Regardless, at the end of that initial encounter, at the end of the day, all those clients will have a project entry after the initial contact, regardless of whether it was positive or challenging. And really the most important fields to collect in this section are the client's housing status, their demographic details, any questions related to homelessness. So have they been unsheltered for a while? Where were they previously? How long have they been unsheltered? How long have they been homeless, etc.? And any disability information. And what you'll notice about these questions is that it's really building up towards finding out what the client's chronicity is. So we want to get down to, is this client chronically homeless? And again, the housing status, homelessness experience, and disability information lead us to that conclusion as to whether a client is chronically homeless or not. And of course, the demographic details are really there just so we can better identify the client and develop a unique ID so that we can track them through the system. And each time you encounter the client, maybe you're going to the same place every 2 days and you find the client and they give you a little bit more every single time. Regardless, you're going to do an outreach contact for this client. So we want to give you credit for doing the work of going out and talking to a client and trying to get in touch with them. And the outreach contact can be documented in the outreach contact section of HMIS. So we'll see in the assessment in the live demonstration where that's at. Then we have engagement. And with an engagement, this is a client, when we enter this stage, a client already has an HMIS record and an outreach project entry. And so any contacts with the client has been recorded in their entry assessment. So in this picture, you'll see that we have already entered the client into our All Chicago Outreach project, and we have recorded a couple of outreach contact dates with that client. And then you may notice that engagement is different. You'll always see this date of engagement under the outreach contacts, and that date of engagement is the process where, boom, the client decided to go through the full assessment with you, give you their full information, and that is then officially counted as the date of engagement, the very beginning of your engagement with a client in this process. And again, what you'll do is fill in this section, this little date section right there, and that will start as the date of engagement. And you can backdate that, but we ask that you never forward date anything because you don't know what will happen in the future. So typically what might happen is that you engage with the client and the next day or when you get back to the office, you go ahead and put that engagement in there. So what happens after the date of engagement? Now, at this point, you'll have the full client information, right? You'll have their demographics. You'll hopefully have their income, disability, health insurance if they have it, non-cash benefits if they have them, etc. So after the date of engagement, at this point, the client's already engaged. They've completed their full assessment, and we're working with the outreach team on a consistent basis. So you catch this person every now and again. You know their usual spots, etc. At that point, after the date of engagement, we're just concentrating on finding the person. So we're concentrating on ensuring that the person is actually there, right? So we want to make sure that this person is consistently there, and the way we're going to do this is through service transactions. And so you are going to add a service transaction, and this service transaction will come from your provider. And it's a pretty simple process, to be frank. It's not too difficult to do because essentially once you add the service, it'll take you to a screen asking you what is the service type, and every agency will have a street outreach program's service type. From there, you'll indicate the start date, end date, and those two should be the same because, again, most of your clients are going to be, the end date is just going to copy immediately from whatever the start date is. It's a single moment in which you're encountering the client. And then once you click Save and Continue at this screen, this middle screen right here, it'll take you to this significantly longer screen, but its bark is worse than its bite. I know that it looks intimidating right here, but really we've already completed this top red section right up top. And the only thing that we have to answer is all the way at the bottom, the need status. And the need status is only two options. It's either successful outreach engagement or outreach unsuccessful outreach engagement. And again, what we mean by a successful outreach engagement is that you were able to talk with a client, they were able to share your information, give you a status update on themselves, etc. And an unsuccessful one is where the client may be standoffish, doesn't want to engage, etc. And at that point, you just click Save and Exit, and that's it. There's no other thing you have to do in terms of the ongoing engagement. Now, there may be situations where a client may tell you, hey, I got a new job, or I have new benefits, something of that sort. In that instance, we would then go ahead and update the client's entry assessment. Well, not their entry assessment. We would actually do an interim assessment and just update that client's record for the most part. But that's sort of, with this population, it may not happen that often. But just keep that in mind that if a client situation does change, it's not only the service transactions that you have to take care of, but you'll also want to update that client's record so that we can see the trajectory of the client as they stay in your program. And then really quickly, I want to talk a little bit about exiting clients. And there might be multiple reasons for exiting clients, and we pared it down to 3, right? So we have the client is no longer participating in the project. So that could mean that the client no longer wants to, either the client no longer wants to participate, or for whatever reason, your agency is no longer reaching out to this person, whatever it may be. And then unable to locate client for 7 days. And I know this this may seem a little surprising to folks, but if you're not able to find a client consistently for the 7 days, what's going to happen there is that it, you know, you're going to have a report that you will be able to run and able to anticipate what that client is going to, you're going to have a report that you will be able to run, and that will indicate to you whether or not you've engaged with that client in 7 days or not. Now, several people may say, and I already anticipate, well, we sometimes run into clients 14 days later, 30 days later. That's great, and you can easily enter them back in. So entering a client is not as a difficult process. Re-entering a client is not the same as entering the client the first time. Re-entering the client is really easy. It populates all the data back in again. What we want to do is sort of try to keep it as close to your engagement as possible. And what you'll find is that this 7-day time frame is actually in the data quality plan that was approved by the HMIS committee. It's been part of the standards since 2017. So that's where this number is coming from. And then the third reason that a client may be exited from the project is that the housing system navigation ends, the client moves into permanent housing. So this is where we will build out. I know some people had some concerns about, well, a client may move into permanent housing, but we'll still see them on that corner because that's what they've known for a while, or that's where their friends are at. They want to go hang out with them, etc. So in that instance, that would be more of a follow-up, and I think that is going to invite more conversation with the outreach work group for the most part. And then and the important data in this process to record is the client's destination and their reason for leaving. So this is part of the documentation. This is the draft that we currently have. And I want to show a live demonstration of what this looks like. So I'm going to move our slide forward to the live demonstration. And I'm going to go ahead and I have my service point window opened up already. Okay, so I'm going to quickly shadow a user. And so let's say the case that I'm going to show you all is going to be, I'm going to show you a completed assessment. Let's go with that first. So here I have my client, Bree, down, and she has a completed outreach assessment. So I'll open that up. And you'll notice that I had so Bree's information is all complete. Bree has successfully engaged with our project. She started with us yesterday. In 2 days, we were able to collect her information, right? So we were information on her ethnicity, I'm sorry, their gender, whether or not they're a domestic violence survivor. And then we haven't gotten to the disabilities, but we'll be filling that out for them. And notice here that the outreach contacts encountered them, and today when we encountered them, that's when they decided to fully engage. And so here I'm going to put for the date of engagement 04/17/2019. So if we go back up, I will take a look at the service transactions. So at this point, I have fully worked with Bree, and now we have a service transaction. So I'm going to go to services, and I'll show you what this looks like. So here, this is in the system already. It's how it's how we track that we contacted Bree. We start out from the top. The service provider, this is already listed. Again, I'm just showing you a completed record. And the need status at this point is actually going to be outreach, successful outreach engagement. And there we go. So this is what the beginning of a clientele would look like. Now let's start out with something a little bit more difficult. Let's start out with a client who is going to be, who does not want to share their data, and I'm going to pretend that they came into, that we ran into them on April 9th. So we'll just pretend that that person came in on April 9th and that we were slowly working with them to get their full information. So again, this client is not in the system because I don't even know their name. So I'll say April 9th, 0406. Let's just go 05 p.m. And I'll say silver hair. Then for name data quality, I'm going to put partial street name. And then I'll search. So you don't have to worry too much about searching. It's only because I want to get access to this add new client with this information button. So I'll click on that. I'll add client and add new household information. I'll say that this person is a female. Continue. And again, we're using the naming convention because the client has not agreed to share their information with me. So I'll say that they are the head of household because it's only a single person and any single person is the head of their own household. Save and exit. And because this person was uncomfortable with me, didn't want to share their information with me, I'm going to immediately lock their record. So I click on the green lock. I remove global from here. Click exit. And now we have locked the client's record. The reason we're doing this is because this person has not given us consent. They have not let us know that they're comfortable with us putting this information in HMIS. They have not willingly given up any information. So we want to lock this person's record to respect their privacy. So when you lock a record, it locks it from any other agency being able to see the record, but folks at your agency will be able to view it. So we'll do the summary, and even though we don't have a name, we're going to enter this person into our project. So I'm going to click on add entry / exit, and then I'm changing my provider to the outreach project. You're always going to select your outreach project. The type typically will be HUD. And I'm going to put it to the date that I engaged with her. So just mind this backdating because here it's April 9th, project start date April 9th. So upon starting with this person, I know immediately that they're their own head of household and that their client location is in Chicago, which is IL 510. And you can see that if you hover over this. I don't know the date of birth. I don't know the primary race. I don't know the ethnicity. I don't know any of this yet, but I know that they're out there. And what I also want to document is the outreach contacts. So upon working with someone who doesn't want to give you any information at all, contacts, the date of contact is going to be 0409, the first date that I saw them. The end date is also going to be 0409. Click on save. And I don't have any other information, so the rest of this assessment will have to wait. And I don't also have a date of engagement because the client has not completed a full assessment with me. So I'll click on save and exit. Click no. And so let's say 2 days later, as this case manager, I'd come back into their record, go to entry / exit. That's how I prefer folks use the entry assessment. Click on their entry assessment, open it up. And then we can start to fill in information. And again, we're going to assume that the client gave us full information 2 days later. So I'm going to put in their demographics. I'm going to put in whether or not they're a domestic violence survivor. I'm going to put in their homeless status, which is going to be homeless. I'm going to say they're in a place not meant for human habitation because I found them on the street or the CTA, whatever it may be. I'll say that this is typically the place they sleep because they told me that. And then because this is typically the place they sleep and their current residence is a place not meant for human habitation, I need to answer this question. So here I will go ahead and indicate that they're sleeping on the CTA. And we can skip these two because this is, again, all these three questions lined up together. If I answered no here, if I answered no to typically sleep, I'd have to skip down to this question. Then I can type in notes on this. I'll indicate that they have no children with them, and I'm just going to say, give you a simple example of who a chronic person would be. That's 1 year or longer, one time, and they've been homeless 12 months. And they had a disagreement. They do have a disability, and we'll say that it's a mental health problem. So now we have the full information required. We can assume, I'm going to skip the monthly income, non-cash benefits, health insurance because it's not pertinent. It'll take up more of our time. So right down here, I'm going to say that this client gave me this information a couple of days later. Let's say the 11th, 2019. They were still on the street in an emergency shelter, Safe Haven. And the start date is going to be 11. Oh, actually, that can just 11 2019 04 11 2019. Okay. So you can leave the start date alone. There we go. All right. So, and now the client had engaged on 04 11 2019 because that's when they gave us the full information. I'll click save and exit there. And so let's say 2 days later, I encounter that client and it was a successful engagement. So to document that, I'm going to go to service transactions instead of here. Click on add service. So again, I have all the client's information. It's already in there. At this point, all I need to worry about is documenting our engagement with them. And before I even do that, actually, I have to change the client's name. So to change a client's name, you go to client profile, click on the client record, and just change the name. Jennifer Smith. Full name reported. If they gave you a social, great. If not, then that's also fine. You can ask for the last four. And we need to know whether they're a U.S. military veteran or not. Click on save. There we go. So now our client details are starting to come together. Click on service transaction. So let's go back to documenting our engagement with them. So at this point, we've updated all of Jennifer's information. We now have her demographics. We now have her housing history. We now have her actual name. So we now have a client with an actual identity in the system. So they fully engaged with our project, and at this point, we switched to that workflow of just doing transactions on this person who is now fully engaged with our project. So we just have to go straight to add service. Service provider is going to be the outreach project. The end date, you want to copy the start date. I'm going to go ahead and put this to 7 p.m. And then the service type is going to be street outreach programs. We'll click on save and continue. And so now this is solidified. You can see that we can edit it if we want, but the system has taken it in. And you'll see all this, and this looks very intimidating. There's a lot of stuff that looks like we have to worry about, but we truly don't. The only thing you have to worry about, the only thing you have to answer is this need status. And when you click on this need status, you'll ignore all the ones that have CES in front of it, the FHP, and you'll go straight to outreach, successful outreach engagement, or outreach, unsuccessful outreach engagement. And at that point, if the client did engage with you in a successful manner, where they talked to you, where they engaged with you, and weren't necessarily standoffish or didn't want to talk to you, that would be a successful one. And that's it. That's the only thing you have to worry about. You'll click on save and exit. And there we go. We have now documented our first engagement with a client. So that is it for now. I wonder if anyone has questions, and I'm going to go ahead and review some of them. So if you have any questions, go ahead and shoot them my way. So Leo, you're right. Once you engage with a client, it's just service transactions at that point, because that's how, it'll be that much quicker for the system to track who you're engaging. It'll actually, I think it'll be an easier system for people to understand once you have a client engaged. And then I see a lot of the feedback regarding 7 days being too short. It's for our system, we need to have as close to live data as possible. This is part of the, that's a lot of it's really there for the purposes of being able to contact someone, of being able to encounter them, of being able to have the coordinated entry system move at a pace that doesn't sort of have clients waiting significantly longer than they have to. So the 7 days, once we start to collect more data on it, more reliable data on it, it can be revisited. And for those of you that are wondering where that 7 days came from, it came from the HMIS committee and the data quality steering committee, and both of those committees are open. We don't have any specific outreach projects. We used to. So if anyone wants to engage with us for those committees, or is interested in attending them, I'd be happy to send you the information. So again, if anyone has questions, please let me know. So Jessica, your question is, how will service transactions connect with the outcomes, specifically for providing case management? The service transactions are really there to, so when you talk about outcomes, I'm assuming you're referring to the outcomes that DFSS set. So I guess I need a little bit more clarification on what you mean by outcomes. Okay, so let's see. So the service transactions are really there more so as it's more so for us to be able to document how many times you've engaged with a client, how many times you've talked with a client. The performance measures, I don't have them off the top of my head. I don't know what the performance measures are. If y'all have them on you, if you could send them my way right now, and I can maybe speak more reliably to that. I don't have an immediate example of the outreach performance measures with me that I can open up, because those reports, they have agency information in there. So I'd have to look into that question for you, unless you have the performance measures or some of that language there with you that I can speak to. So if anyone has okay. So I think that's just going to have to be something that I address later on down the line for the purposes of this. The main purpose of the service transactions is to really document where the client's at, where they are located. It's in terms of the performance outcomes, I have to look at how the service transactions are informing those or will be informing those. Any other questions? So I am going to be putting this video up online likely tomorrow. Our training is going to be on April 23rd, Tuesday of next week. If anyone has any issues or concerns, please let me know. Shoot me an email at smunoz@allchicago.org, or you can always go to our help desk, which is at hmis.allchicago.org, and you can submit a ticket and we will answer your question there. So with that having been said, I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar for everyone. Thank you very much for joining me, and we will be talking shortly.